Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
I guess this isn't really like a horror thing, but it's in the ballpark of the macabre. It counts.
There are definitely undeadness. There are definitely spooky, scary skeletons. All your definite, dark, and twisted desires shall be fulfilled, Matt, as we fully decompress just exactly what it was you have under your bed there. And hello, everyone! Welcome to another episode of Good Gentlemen. I am your host, Geek for Fun.
Hey, what's up? I'm that Matt kid.
And unfortunately, Steve has had to save us all from ancient eldritch beings from beyond all senses of reality. So while he fights them off, armed with nothing but a spoon and his wit, we will be holding down the fort here and reviewing I guess if anyone could make out the preamble for whatever music I decide to put on this, a debatable horror film, if this fits. I'm going to leave this up to you, that Matt kid, to justify your pick here and why we're doing it. And what even is it?
We are talking about the stop motion film The Corpse Bride, starring Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter, and directed by Tim Burton. Basically, it's not really a horror film in that it is not setting out to frighten or scare you, but it is certainly horror themed, and it certainly delves into the aesthetic of horror and into the aesthetic of the undead and the grave and the macabre and all that good stuff. So no, it is not a horror film in the same vein as like a slasher. But I did want to do something that's, kind of visually interesting, still fits within that realm of something you would watch around Halloween time. And I've always been a big fan of, anyone who knows me knows I'm a big fan of like hack slash or other things like that, things that kind of combine the idea of, romance with horror and all that kind of fun stuff. So I don't know. I just wanted to talk about this one, mostly because I haven't seen it in a long time. And I do believe we are right around the 15-year anniversary of it, which is kind of crazy because this was 2005.
It's definitely an interesting one, and one I've had heard about before, but never actually sat down to watch until you suggested it, Matt. So this was an interesting one for me as well because I'm quite familiar with Tim Burton's repertoire, his works. And his stop motion stuff, particularly like Nightmare Before Christmas, doesn't even need to be said. But I think it's just something that probably, in my opinion, brings out the best in him. I think it's just where his real passion lies. Like you look at early Tim Burton when he was just doing his school projects. It's all stop motion, and it's where his art style really gets to shine. That's an underrated aspect of Tim Burton. He's actually a really good artist, but not. Obviously, he's not like a Neil Adams or like Alex Ross. He's not drawing photorealism, but he is a good artist. And a Tim Burton drawing will make you feel things. The Superman Lives documentary, which came out a while ago, kind of shit on his designs for Superman. But like, I don't know. I think it's really interesting to see what it does look like Superman Scissorhands. But like, how? That's something new. Like, what does that even look like? Stuff like that I always think is really interesting. His aesthetic style, and that's all over this film. I think that's the first thing I'm gonna definitely 100% praise. This is a gorgeous film. It's specifically one as well that's gorgeous in the sense of it knows when to be ugly, which normally things, and I see a lot of artists kind of struggle with this, is it's hard for people to make unattractive characters. It's hard for people to make unattractive settings or boring settings because people don't want to do that. People don't. It's not fun, really. At least when you're first starting out, you just want to draw like the coolest, craziest, most beautiful people you can imagine, and coolest, craziest settings you can imagine. And you need all of that for sure. That's your lifeblood. But like any bright color, it always appears brighter if you have a little bit of dark next to it. And that's what this film is really nearly entirely all about. Is about that. Finding beauty in the most unlikely of places in a way where it's completely two worlds in visual presentation, not just story-wise. Everything has changed when we dive into the darker aspects. Yet when we go to the more normal civilian life, it's horror. It's, please, I don't want to be here anymore. Get me out of it. It's so dull. So that's really interesting about this film, and that's something I really latched onto. But I guess if I want to get more into that, I'll have to go into more spoiler territory. So just general vague thoughts is I did enjoy this watch. I wouldn't say I was blown away or anything. I definitely do have some issues with this film that we'll go into, but I definitely don't regret anything about it. I definitely think this is a solid piece, and one that is kind of underappreciated. Again, it doesn't have to be a masterwork to be appreciated more than it is, but you're right, Matt, is Nightmare Before Christmas everyone talks about. Even Frankenweenie kind of has a bigger rap than this does. This one just seems to be really the most cult of Tim Burton's cult films, which is funny to say.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It does live in the shadow of Nightmare Before Christmas. I don't think there's any way getting around that, because you've got Nightmare Before Christmas, then James and the Giant Peach, and then this. And these kind of are almost this trio of late 90s to early 2000s stop motion films that Tim Burton was involved in. This was the only one that he was actually involved in the directing process. He mostly produced and helped do the story work for Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach. And obviously James and the Giant Peach is based on a Roald Dahl book. But, this one, it's almost like going from Batman 89s to Batman Returns. Like, this one is just full on Tim Burton. Like, there is nothing stopping him anymore. Like, there is nothing holding him back, and you can see that in every aspect of it, the character designs, everything like that. I think part of it is that this one was not, Disney wasn't involved in this one at all. Nightmare Before Christmas, Disney release, huge big thing, became a massive part of Disney's fan base, whereas this one was released not through Disney. It didn't quite have that same broad appeal that comes with having that Disney logo and having that Disney production. But it is interesting to see it, the kind of the evolution of the stop motion work from Nightmare Before Christmas to James and the Giant Peach to this. Generally, I do think this is absolutely solid. I think it's worth, especially if you're a fan of stop motion, I think this is gorgeous. I think this is absolutely worth checking out. That being said, I am in the same boat as you. Part of the reason I suggested this is because I wanted to rewatch it. I watched this probably like 6 years ago and haven't seen it since then. And I was underwhelmed by it then, and I'm still a little underwhelmed by it. I don't think Danny Elfman brings his A game even a little bit on this. And I think that while it is worth your time to see, I certainly don't think it's going to blow anyone away on the same level as Nightmare Before Christmas, because I do think Nightmare Before Christmas, comparing them, because it's kind of almost natural to do so, is the stronger film. But I think visually there's so much to see here. There's so much, interesting things going on in the animation. And I think, it is definitely worth your time, but it doesn't quite hold a candle, I don't think, to some of his other work.
Yeah.
Broadly.
I'm with you there. I think that's probably why I brought the aesthetic first, because I wanted to strong load with the thing I love.
Yeah.
Before I get into some of the things, it's just that's all right. Or, I'm not sure I'd have done that. Yeah, this film has some... They're not we're not gonna do a cinema sins here. Like, this is why this film is bad.
Yeah.
Reason number 25. I didn't like the dog.
Ding.
Okay, I'll give you actually one. This was my cinema sins moment, and this isn't actually just for this film. This is for all Tim Burton films. Is this guy really? You either have like all the chin or no chin. if you're a Tim Burton character, you either are like 90% chin, or you have chin is not a concept you have yet become aware of. That's how you define, and it's normally how you define who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. Like the length of their chin is proportionate to how evil they are. It's like if you were gonna do like a scouter reading on a Tim Burton film, and so like that's something I just couldn't. As I was watching this, I just couldn't get my eyes away from. I was just mesmerized at just the sheer display of. It's not exactly like there's one type of chin. It's just like there's multiple chins, but you just know there's a lot of it, or like none of it. So that struck out to me. So that's the cinema sin bullshit way out. Actual reasoning wise, I think the biggest problem with this film is it does the human world is boring and uninteresting and kind of bland, and all these people are expressed. This is Victorian England. It's these people who are living, but none of them are actually living. And then when we go to the underworld and we see everyone's living and everything's bright and colourful for the first time, and the music's much better and everything's just popping and all these characters are more interesting, and everything about the style gets really playing. Like that musical number when we first learn about Emily's backstory.
Only good song in the movie. Breathtaking.
And also it's sung by John Williams himself. Which I think is mesmerizing. Especially for the voice they give him. But yeah, that's all just amazing, and you're so full through it, and you're with it, you're with the film, and you're with Emily, and you're with Victor, and they're like, you're starting to get it. Okay, this is kind of a fucked up premise, but this was kind of sweet and beautiful, and then we keep going back to it does it too well, to where every time we go back to the main world, and it's yes, we get it, the parents are mean and crotchety, and they don't like things. We got that in like the first musical number. We don't have to keep coming back to this joke. Yes, we get it. The Chin Man himself is evil. You could see that the moment he raised his eyebrow in the first scene. We don't have to keep lampshading this. And the kind of I guess the most controversial. We can get back to that one at the end. I think that's what people are most curious about, where we land on that one. The thing that kind of is controversial that I know about this film. But like everything about the living world is done too boringly to work. It's like there's no. It's kind of fucked up.
Well, it's like. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say it's kind of fucked up whenever you leave a film wishing, "Wow, I wish I was dead."
It's almost like, and this is a weird comparison. It's like when we were talking about Naruto a few episodes back, how it does its job so well of making you kind of hate these little shit kids until the story gets going. It's almost like that. It's like this film goes out of its way to make the human world, I would say, aggressively unpleasant. Like to the point where you just hate being there. Like Victoria's parents, especially. Like Victor's parents are fine, they're whatever. Victoria's parents, the super short guy and the really tall woman with the chin for miles and the hair for miles, like anytime they're on screen, you have these incredible character designs that so quickly, like you said, just immediately communicate almost everything you need to know about these characters, because that's one of the strengths of Tim Burton's art style, is that he creates characters you can just look at them and be like, that's a fucking piece of shit right there. But then it's just like, okay, but why do we then need to spend like minutes and minutes with them just being hopelessly and aggressively unpleasant to the point where you're just eagerly awaiting the return to the underworld? And, you know, kind of this dichotomy between the living world and the underworld is clearly something Tim Burton's a fan of. I mean, you see it in like Beetlejuice and things like that. So this isn't territory that is unfamiliar to him. This is pretty kind of typical stuff for him. But I do see what you're saying in that it's so good at being unpleasant when you're in the human world that I do think it does start to drag the film down a little bit, because anytime we get some momentum from the fun stuff, and you've got, you know, the musical numbers, and you've got Michael Goff being really, you know, fun as the old skeleton guy and all this stuff, and then it just kind of grinds to a halt when we go back up to Victoria and yada 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 yada. So I do agree with you there for sure. Especially because of how fun that stuff is. And it's funny too, because they almost treat, because the dude with the huge chin, who's like the main, who ends up becoming a big bad guy, they almost treat it like at the end it's a reveal, but like you can tell that's him in the like musical number, because they like show his silhouette and he still has that huge fucking chin. Like it's good stuff.
It's pretty rough in that aspect. Well, not pretty rough, that's exaggerated. It's not appalling. It's just, it becomes a movie where you're like happy to have it on and watched it. But it probably is the reason why you were like, oh, you know, Corpse Bride, that film, when you're suggesting to review it. Once I finished watching, I immediately understood why that thought came to your mind of like, is it good? I don't know. It's kind of memorable for parts. A lot of this film, really, I think it has a really solid premise. I think that first little bit in the human world, I think, is done well, if a little long. But I think it's justifiable. And then when we first get Emily, that whole sequence, I think, is probably the peak of the film, where she rises from the grave, and how I am still amazed at how they light that puppet, how they make her move and follow him, and then we get that amazing transition when she first does that kiss. Like, that is peak Tim Burton. That is exactly his aesthetic. That is exactly why people go to his films. That is exactly why you'll still see Emily cosplays to this day. That's why she's kind of transcended the rest of this film. But as she should, she is the Corpse Bride. And why that became such a staple. That immediately is perfect character introduction. And then you get a good introduction to her backstory, and you're like, okay, yeah, I guess where this is going. But then it never gets that momentum again. There's never a sense of agency with these characters. Victor's always trying to get back, and you can understand that, but he's also such a passive character in general, that he's getting back really meekly and really, oh well, I guess I'll do trickery, and then he goes back and he gets brought again by Emily in quite a horrifying manner. But then he's kind of all right with it, and he's sorry, and like it's hard to get a gauge of like specifically. I know Emily's deal. I know everything that she wants. I know everything she needs and everything she wants with that. I know even the villain's deal. I know it's very simple. I know what he wants, and you know his plan, everything. It's our other two main characters, Victoria and Victor, who I'm just like, I'm very struggling to, especially Victoria. She is effectively a non-character for a lot of this, which was a really big shame, where like the entire film was meant to be about their romance, and they have like 2 scenes together.
Yeah, it's. And are we crossing into spoiler territory at this point?
Yeah, at this point, yeah, we've pretty much crossed there.
It's frustrating because like you're absolutely right, where like Victor starts and he's just like, this is a horrible misunderstanding, I've got to get back, and that's like a natural place that he would start. But there's a lot of time dedicated to Victor just kind of being sad that he's stuck in this situation and not really doing anything. And at one point he does agree to like stay down there, but it's only after he hears that Victoria is going to get married to Barkis. Like he hears that Victoria is going to marry someone else, and then he's just like, oh well, that sucks, I guess I'll just stay here where it's cool and fun. Like it doesn't feel like he realizes that this place is more liberating and freeing than the world he comes from, and so in death he's able to find a life he could never have before. It just feels like he just gets in a situation, he tries to get out of it, realizes that even if he got out of the situation, the chick he was going to marry, who he didn't even know before, is now going to marry someone else. And he's just like, oh, that sucks. I guess I'll just stay here then. Like, you can't get a handle on the dude. Like, he's not, he's not one of your proactive protagonists. He's just kind of along for the ride. Victoria is more of a proactive character than he is. And it's just it is a little bit frustrating in that aspect.
Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that character can't be done well.
Sure.
You can have a character who is just kind of along for the ride for this amazing thing and pulls and push between these different directions and then makes a choice. Like I think that has worked. I mean, that's just what Luke Skywalker is, right? Like that's you can have a character like that. We've seen that archetype done well of like it becoming not only a journey for us, the audience, to go on, but as he becomes more comfortable, we become more comfortable with the world and the saying, and then we might make more decisions, and we have a greater understanding. Like, it's a very natural choice to go for storytelling. But the importance of what you want to do with that is they normally are on and I think you've seen this done better in more recent films, like I believe it's called Coco.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where yes, we have a character who's kind of in this dilemma, specifically with like the world and the dead and the human world, and they're using that just a position to show a more positive version of death, a more not as westernized, it's the worst thing that can ever happen to you in the entire world kind of thing. Like it is a kind of flipping that on the head. It's like, well, I'll live in kind of shit, and like who knows what kind of crazy shit, like that kind of thing, which Tim Burton likes to do as well. And I'm fine with that. I like that. I think that's very cool and interesting, especially for storytelling, where you can make that effectively just like your Asgard. You can make it a different world to go through with a very simple barrier to entry. But the issue there is we get to explore more. We don't just... There are just two locations in this entire film, which I think is probably the biggest issue, is and I think that's probably just the technical limitations of just like the format and budgetary and lengthwise and how many puppets they could do, and specifically the scope of this is where we get to the Land of Dead and it's crazy and it's cool and it's fun, but then we don't really do anything there except find a way to get out of it. we don't spend time with Victor going through there and missing what he had from home specifically, and then coming back and finding things. We just kind of have him wander around trying a way to get back, and then when he does leave, he's like, well, I prefer this place more. It's like, well, we don't know why you're connected to either of them. There's nothing specifically that grounds you. The only thing you got is like, well, your dog's dead and the dog seems to like you a lot and you seem to like the dog a lot. It's like, well, I guess that's the only one I can think that tethers you here. But then do you like your parents? It's really fucking hard to tell. I don't know how this film ends is on such a, well, what next? Because the place they're in is still pretty shitty, and from what I'm gathering, they're still going to be really poor on both sides, and none of that situation seems to have been resolved. So, do they just end up like their parents again? Like, it's hard to come away with this with a sense of accomplishment. I think is the key thing, is where everything we're going to and the goals we have in this film, none of those are what is achieved. And much why I think Emily stands out is she's the only one who gets that. I have an arc and I have a resolution, and that's very clear from beginning, middle to end. She doesn't really change her mind until it makes sense to. She's not flip-flopping. And you understand her very clearly. Which again is a shame, because the cast is really good and the performance are really good. I don't think anyone's kind of phoning it in here, unless you think they disagree.
No, I mean it's it's funny, especially when you compare it to a couple of those other stop motion films that Tim Burton was involved in. This kind of has a pretty all-star cast. I mean, you've got obviously Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, but you've also got Christopher Lee is in this, Michael Gough is in this, Richard E. Grant is in this, which I didn't know that was him until I looked it up later. So I mean, like, there is a pretty substantial cast in this. And I know this was one of Johnny Depp's first, if not his first, like, animated roles. Like, I know this was being in production at the same time as Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie. And so literally Johnny Depp was going from being Willy Wonka by day to, you know, being Victor by night, and was basically both of these characters simultaneously, which is, you know, kind of cool. And, you know, Johnny Depp, you know, obviously caveats about Johnny Depp and that whole thing aside, you know, the man has always been, you know, a fairly talented actor. And I do think he does well here, well enough anyways. And I think Helena Bonham Carter in particular does pretty well here. You know, there are some characters like Victoria who, you know, the performance is there, it's good, it's serviceable, but Victoria is a character where I wouldn't say that the actress gets a ton of really memorable stuff to work with to even really make that performance shine as much as, like, you know, as much as Emily's character does. So it's not that the voice cast is bad or anything. They're all mostly good. I just don't think all the characters are written in a way that really allows those actors to shine as much as some of the others.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of those things which you get it a lot with, I think it's probably a thing with Tim Burton films as well, is like the main protagonist is normally the one who, because he likes to base his protagonists off himself a lot. Unless you're Batman, and then you don't get any screen time. The main protagonist...
He's mysterious, Alfie. Gosh.
Yes, of course. The main character is always kind of based off Bart, and it's why they all have dogs. It's why they all kind of have very similar features and designs and stuff. And that's good for any artist to put yourself in the work and to write around that. But as a result, the struggles are always kind of the same-ish. There's always like a feeling of isolation and not fitting in and stuff. There's all powerful eternal themes. But because the main character doesn't fit in, you have to then kind of make the rest of the world justifiable. So, like, they're not fitting in not because they're actually an asshole, but because they're too good, in a sense. And this kind of has that, to the extent where you don't get to really... You can't flesh out the other characters, because if you make them any more layered and give them depth, then it does kind of become a little, why he's the outcast then? He's the fucking loser who's ruined all these people's day. It's like they have to be worse by default. And that doesn't really apply to Victoria, but it's just less so the fact of, like, well, we have two love interests in this film. And one is the title character with the cool design and the cool world. So we're gonna spend more time with that one. But then you come to the decision where, like, yeah, but that's not who he ends up with. So, like, why were we doing that?
That's I think one of the more frustrating things. And I mean, I think that gets at kind of, you know, I would be curious to talk to people who saw this when it came out, because it does have that, like, you know, you've got two love interest characters, and you've got that. I'm sure you've got people. I'm sure back in 2005, it was just like Twilight. You had Team Victoria and Team Emily. I don't know, but you do have that. You have this character who they devote so much time to, who they give so much attention to, both from the design, from the writing, the performance. And then you have Victoria, who really doesn't get any of that. And he winds up with her mostly because she's alive, I guess. And it's very odd that you're going to spend all this time developing Emily and developing her world and developing the relationship between them, only to have him go back with Victoria. And I'm not saying that you can't tell that story. I'm not saying that you can't develop a relationship between two characters and not have them get together. You absolutely can do that. But it's odd then that you really spend very little time developing Victoria. So it's not so much a problem that he doesn't end up with Emily. The issue is that he ends up with a woman that I feel like we barely know anything about.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely kind of the case. We don't know, aside from that very admittedly charming opening where they're playing the piano
for sure.
together. Like that's a very good way to introduce them. And if that was like we got more of that along the way, like I don't know, in some fucking cool, you could do some cool like, okay, so like the living and the dead and the two separate worlds. Okay, but what do the ghosts look like? Like, could he have a scene where he's trying to reach out and speak to her while he's still in that world? Is like a way you can do that. You could do some cool puppet animation tricks there, where like he's full of color because he's in the dead, but she's still all black and white. Like, you could do some cool creative stuff with that scene to justify them having more scenes together without sacrificing the core basic plot.
Right.
But at the same time, see, I was gonna say, yeah, but runtime-wise, this isn't actually that short of a film. It does kind of drag in some places.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's an animated, like, not only is it an animated film, but it's a stop motion animated film. So there's not a lot of it's not even an hour and a half. So I mean, because animated films, you're going to have a shorter runtime. Stop motion, you're limiting yourself because stop motion is such a difficult thing to do, and this movie does it very well. I mean, this film is gorgeous. I think if you go back and look at Nightmare Before Christmas and then look at this, you can see the improvement in stop motion just in terms of actually animating character movement. Because I have watched Nightmare Before Christmas recently, and this film is absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, I mean, you are going to inherently have a shorter story, so it's so important when you're working in animation that you really make every scene count. You really make every scene feel important. And even though this movie is not long, it does feel way longer than it is. It does drag a lot in places, and I think that's because the movie never keeps its momentum going very well. I think if the movie really rolled with that energy that it had when he first goes down to the underworld, I feel like this would be a much different film in terms of its pacing and things like that.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely something to keep in mind of why doesn't hit as well as it could, because the ideas in play here are really strong. I think the idea of seeing what the Tim Burton underworld looks like compared to Tim Burton getting to also do his Victorian setting and like paralleling them throughout the course of a film, rather than, okay, we leave here and then we never see here and then we come back at the end. It's like it's a back and forth thing between two protagonists. Like, that's a cool idea. That's a cool way to justify living and dead both being worthwhile and both being harmonious. But then as we go into more plot stuff, like let's say the whole thing with Emily and Victor forming this connection and stuff, how you'd want that to be framed then, if this is going to all be in service of Emily or Victor eventually coming to terms with, like, well, maybe life's not so bad, maybe I should give it a shot with this person who I clearly have a connection with, and it's more founded, but I should. Those scenes of Emily then should be kind of more about like her talking about what she misses, what she would want to do, what him being here with her can let her do, and kind of reminiscing, because Emily's got all that thing like she has to let go of like it all. That's her journey, and that's where she kind of ascends at the end of it. But it's not that. It's more just like, well, it's pretty sweet down here, actually.
Yeah.
That it's actually, once you get past all the grotesque stuff, I mean, we're all puppets. You're still a pretty baller looking puppet, not gonna lie. So, I mean...
Like, you may be a corpse, but, like, the important parts seem to be intact.
Like,
let's make this work.
You clearly were not aiming to make her horrific. Let's just say that.
Right, exactly, yeah.
You clearly did not aim to go with a Victorian wedding dress with a copious amount of cleavage. Let's be upfront here, Barton. Your priorities mainly just came to you really wanted to draw a hot corpse woman.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of that in there in the text, right? I mean, like at the beginning of the story, we have Victoria getting into this super mega elaborate like corset and dress, and there's even talk of like, oh, you two can't be in the same room together without a chaperone, and like, oh, what are you doing? What was he doing in your room? Like there is this it's not even just the colors and things like that. There is like a deliberate sort of contrasting of the repression of the life in which he lives and the freedom of the life of the afterlife. So it's almost like death can almost be viewed as this like escape from this repressive like society that he lives in, that is so it just bears down on people, that gives people no freedoms and things like this. And it's almost just like, well, hey, if you're dead, you don't have to live in this world that's like this. It's just repressive and horrible. And they don't do anything to refute that. So then when he decides to stay alive at the end, it's just like, okay, well, I guess you're just gonna live in this shitty place for a while.
And that's kind of the crux of it all, really, because other than that central conceit and that central concept, there's not really much else going on here. There's not a lot going on. Like, we get a little bit of the how marriage and the idea of love was a financial trade. It was not considered a romantic thing. It was not considered a spiritual thing or anything to do with that. It was a purely financial transaction to get married. And we go through all sorts of that, of like the family who's doing it for status and the family who's doing it for wealth, and then the family who's been there for a long time and clearly had done it for wealth, but now all their wealth has run out, so they need to do it again. And then we have the one guy who's like, he knows the system and knows how fucked it up is, and he's just using it to his entire advantage. So all of that's in there. But other than saying that's bad, there's not really much, like, there's nothing to do with how the dead society works. I guess the dead society thing, you can kind of dive into, like, there's just equality in death, to where finally we get to have a scene where the carriage worker just gets to talk and just be a dude now that he's dead, rather than just being a coughing, miserable guy who's just been bossed around his whole life. When he dies, he's kind of chill. He's like, oh yeah, it's pretty sweet, got friends now. So it's this is so fucked up talking about this film, because then you're like, oh well, you're happy for him. He's like, wait, should I? It's a really dark message to send to people, not gonna lie.
Yeah, by not giving you this answer to what makes it worth being alive, it's like, this film kind of incentivizes some weird shit. That's all I'm saying. Like, just like, there's no, because she's got this whole song. It's one of the only kind of charming, because I stand by what I said. I don't think Danny Elfman brings his A game at all in this. I don't find any piece of music in this memorable, like, even remotely. But there is one kind of charming song that Emily has, where she's going on about how, like, her two friends, like the spider and the worm, are just like, oh well, you're really interesting, and you dance and you do piano, and you're this free spirit, and you're basically just saying you're an actual fascinating fucking character. And then her refute is like, oh, but she's alive. And that's the only refute she has for why Victor would choose Victoria over her. And it's like, yeah, then that's it. That's all the film ever comes up with. And that's pretty much, because that's her, like, sad song and you're kind of rooting for her to overcome that fear and just say, well, it doesn't matter, I'm gonna go for this. But it's like, the movie never refutes that. The movie never sits there and says, well, here's the reason why life is still fucking worth living. It's really odd that way.
And I guess that's just like I guess it's just down to the creator because, like honestly, I don't think Tim Burton does have the answer to that.
I mean, that's fair.
I don't
Yeah.
think Tim Burton actually does think, and I don't want to presume this about, but this is the vibe that I get in all of his work. And I think it's fine as a creator to be interested in the macabre and all of that is. I don't want to refute anyone who does say that, but like, of all the people in the world to give me a hopeful message about continuing on with life and doing it, it's not going to be Tim Burton. And I think this might have been the wrong... I think it's clear where his interest actually lied. Of like, because he didn't write the screenplay for this, which I think is important. I think actually a lot of presentation is probably what makes this film come off the way it does. Is Tim Burton heard he could do Corpse Bride and cool stop motion spooky skeleton dances and dead jokes and stuff like that, and he's like, oh yeah, sick. I can go nuts. Oh yeah, and I can do a Victorian setting as well. Okay, yeah, cool. I know how to make that too. But then probably didn't realize, you're making a really strong argument for like suicide. He's like, well,
yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, if that was intentional, like, I could almost see that. Like, I could almost see someone talking about this specific time in history when marriage was this fucked up, when the level of kind of repression of the self and self-actualization was this kind of fucked up, and making a film that says, maybe death is better than living this way. But that's not how this movie ends, and that's not exactly what because the movie ends with him deciding to stay alive, but visually it communicates that staying alive is the worst option you could choose in this setting. So it's very odd, because if you wanted to tell that story, you could, but it doesn't, but it acts like it's going to.
They don't actually... I think what's well visually represented by that is we don't end in colour. The color doesn't come back to the world. We're still in the black and white world with the moon, where only Emily goes off with the colour. Everything else stays in the black and light.
Because you could have had that. You could have had Emily as a character be something that maybe brings color back to the world of the living by influencing the people who are still alive. Because that's what that whole ending scene could have been, where the dead actually come back and join the living for this like night. But you don't get the sense that there was like an influence there to maybe bring some of the life they found in death back to the people who are living. No one learns anything from that.
We get that nice sequence where like people are reunited with their dead ones, and like what's meant to be initially like a scary sequence gets turned into it's a hopeful sequence. But it's not done in a way where we get any kind of... What I think this film needed was not to end on that shot. I think we needed like a flash forward of like their kids or some shit to show that things were different now. Because that's just the sense I get from this film. Of it's just like, I feel so sad for these two people who are inevitably going to end up like both of their parents from what we've been given of this. There's no... Then Victor clearly doesn't have any fucking... Unless he becomes a master piano player and gets big that way in a very small village that has no connection to the outside world, then I don't know, Chief. It's not looking good. So yeah, it's just one of those things where there's a sense of like this film just kind of ends on a bittersweet note for me, which I guess can be part of the intention as well. It's like, oh well, it's meant to be kind of like, well, now the uncertainty of life begins, and life, the thing about life is being dead does have an ending, whereas life, you don't get to see the end, and it's just kind of left up to you to decide. I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, that works. I just think execution-wise, it doesn't really hit that. Like, it sounds better on paper, or like me saying it, than it actually does watching the film.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you don't know how intentional that idea really was, and obviously intent's only so important, but you're kind of sat there trying to think of a way to make that ending work thematically, and you feel like you're almost kind of reaching.
That's the big one for me, and the one I'd actually like to hear about, because I know I did a little research of like just like watching like behind the scenes stuff before it came out. I never seen any like Tim Burton responding to any of the response, because I know, again, we've touched on it a little bit here already, but the big fan thing is a lot of people are just like, I wish you went up with Emily. That's kind of like what the big fan presence of Corpse Bride is all of no one cosplays Victoria. Let's just put it that way. No one cosplays Victoria. Everyone loves Emily. Everyone loves her story, and everyone's like, oh, they should have ended up together and done like a kind of like, what if Romeo and Juliet was a happy ending, where it's like, oh, we got away from everyone by dying, but like it's really not that bad, because this is a world where like death is just like another realm of reality where you can do cool, wacky adventures. And it's like a fuck you to the system. And then you kind of do the X-Men thing, right? Where it's like, okay, it's not really about living and dead. It's about escaping your parents' views of the world and like sexuality and lack of color and stuff. And this becomes, instead of someone deciding should they keep on living and then deciding yes without getting a reason, it would then become, should someone decide to stay in what's their comfort zone and comfortability and where they live, or should they leave home and go and meet new people and kiss a girl and find out what life really means and kind of live a little, which, to be fair, is not the kind of film Tim Burton would make. So that definitely was never on his agenda. But I definitely feel a lot of this would have worked. It's just such a curious mix of things to me. There's clearly talent involved. It's just everyone's aim feels a little bit misaligned. Where we're all on target still. We still hit, but we could have hit a bullseye with this one, and we're a little bit out.
Yeah. I mean, it's supposed to be based on some sort of like folk story from like the 19th century, but I have no idea what it's supposed to, like, I can't find a source for that or what the folk story is supposed to be. So I'm not sure how closely it aligns with whatever that original folk story is. But yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. There's definitely this sort of dissonance between, really, I think what the core of what it is there's that sort of dissonance between narratively what's happening on paper and how that gets represented visually. So it just doesn't make those beats hit the way that they're probably, intended to when you read it in the script. But I mean, when you get the moments where it's firing on all cylinders, it definitely is, like you already said, the moment when he, recites the vows and puts the ring on the finger that he, I guess, assumes is like a tree branch, and then she comes out and there's the lighting and all the moments we see her moving and dancing with the veil flowing. Like it's gorgeous for sure, and I think the film is consistently pretty impeccable visually, definitely. So I think that does shine, even if those visuals are sometimes not really conveying exactly the beats of the story as it unfolds.
And I think that's probably, because I'm just looking up this as well. It's like this is also was being filmed while Tim Burton was working on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
right? Yep.
Which explains a lot to me, because this does feel like something like, oh yeah, I'll help out. Oh yeah, I want to do the cool dead stuff. Oh yeah, I'll do the Corpse Bride thing. Okay, have fun. Like it does feel like he half worked on this one.
Yeah, he was doing that, and obviously Johnny Depp was, like I said, doing both roles at the same time. So I mean that is definitely gonna impact your how. Yeah, I mean he showed up for the stuff he was interested in, and was like, oh, now I gotta go work on my movie.
And that's a shame. Because again, you're right. This was made as a folktale. This does have a lot going into it, but it doesn't kind of mesh up with the sum of its parts. There's a lot of, I guess I'd be curious just to see, because this is a very one and done tale. There's nothing really left open for like a sequel. There's no real, you get to see the world of the dead, but it's just kind of a world of the dead with a cool aesthetic. There's no specific mythology to this one. But I don't know. I feel like I think they didn't quite realize just how damn good the design of Emily was, with like the iconography and how much that caught on with people. that I think they didn't quite realize what they had on their hands is they did have another Jack Skellington in the same way that he became so iconic as this very much became the same way. You could have done more with that. You could have livened that up a little bit. You could have explored her specifically, and instead of them maybe becoming about Victor having to decide between two people, and one of them we never really get to spend time with, it then becomes a story of Emily finding two people that she puts together when she decides to let go, and you make her the protag. And follow her perspective a little bit more once we get to introduce her backstory. We see some more of that, and because I think that's probably where you'd want to lean to make that. It's like, okay, so we don't want to develop Victoria anymore. It's like, all right, develop Victor a little bit less and make him more the sidekick in her journey to let him go. I think would have probably been the key there. I think you could have then salvaged not having to spend as much time in the boring living world, because then it becomes from her perspective. Like, well, yeah, she can't go back. She doesn't really need to love it or to like it or anything. But she also then becomes about letting go and just accepting everything about revengeance and not what you're promised and stuff. Because there's more stuff as well of like dealing with like how for women of this time, like marriage would be talked up, and to be fair, like it still happens very, very recently. Like marriage is like this is your life. This is the biggest moment of your life is when you get married, and if you can't get married, you might as well be dead, kind of thing. So the idea of like Emily's life quite literally ending when she isn't allowed to get married because the guy fucking kills her. That's interesting. There's stuff to dive into with like feminist politics and like the rise of like independence from that. I was like, well, I don't need to be married to be happy. I don't need to have this fulfillment. And she kind of comes to that, but we don't really spend time with it. It's all from his perspective. So yeah, there's just like misaligned focus, I think, is the key thing here. Is that there's good premise, good characters, good world. None of the animation needs to be changed. All of that's gorgeous. All the designs are perfect. Probably could touch up the score a good bit, and just like reframe it a little bit. And you might have been able to make it shine just that little bit brighter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because even focusing on Emily, you're absolutely right. You could have had almost a fish out of water thing with her whenever she is in the human world, not because she's unfamiliar with it, but because it looks so different to her now that she's spent so much time in the afterlife and things like that. So I mean, there is definitely a lot that could have been done there just by changing the focus onto her a little bit more, for sure.
I think that's definitely a big thing that would have, given a little bit I don't meat on the bones. Way. Geeks are fun.
But I mean, yeah, it is a it's definitely worth a watch around Halloween time. As are a lot of Tim Burton films. And yeah, I mean, visually, I don't think I can undersell how gorgeous a lot of things are about this. I think this is a stop motion movie from 2005, and I still think if this movie had come out today, I think the visuals would have been just as well received. Now, I mean, I haven't seen some of the recent stop motion stuff like Kubo and the Two Strings or what have you, but I mean, it's still gorgeous. I mean, this still holds up phenomenally to me. So I mean, certainly nothing against the craftsmanship on display here. It just doesn't quite hit all the places you'd hope it would hit, unfortunately.
I mean, yeah, that's basically summed it up. Folks, I think that about does it for everything we could say about this film. I'm legitimately surprised we managed to keep going as much as we did. So
Me too.
Well done to you, Matt.
Yeah.
But and it's not a bad thing. It's just like some films, you can sit down and watch them and have a good time. But when you put them into this format where we have to review them and we have to try and really dissect them in as much detail as we possibly can, it is where it comes across a little bit more of like coming across with flaws and things that can be improved. but it's never out of a sense of, or sometimes it's just out of a sense of meanness, depending what mood we wake up on. But it is normally just out of a sense of like, oh man, that could have been. Hopefully someone takes the ideas from this and the missteps from this, and if you're a writer and you're listening to this, or you're young guys and you're listening to this, and you're dealing with a writer who is making these mistakes, link on this video and be like, hey, don't do that, because Tim Burton did that, and he could have had another Nightmare on Christmas on his hands if he didn't fuck it up. He didn't fuck it up. It's a fine film. It's a good one, but definitely one which has untapped potential lying beneath the grave. Scores for this one, Matt.
Scores for this one. I would say Corpse Bride. I would I don't know. Honestly, I'm kind of leaning a little bit lower. I'm probably gonna say 3 out of 5. Man, I don't even know. 3 out of 5 skeleton doggos. Tim Burton, stop putting the exact same fucking dog in every movie challenge.
He loves the doggo. No, man, it's okay. You can never have enough doggo in a movie. The good thing about Tim Burton is he always kills the dog, but he does it like before the movie starts. Yep. So it's okay because he brings the dog back. It's like the opposite of JoJo, is he can't stop reviving dogs. So I'm all for Tim Burton's anti-dead dog agenda by leading hard into it. Give me more of them. But yeah, it's not a bad film. It's a good film. It's a good watch. So I'm gonna go slap bang in the middle as well with a 3 out of 5. Good lord, the chins. Because I still can't get over the variety of chin design on display here and elsewhere in Tim Burton's repertoire. Okay, because the master of disaster couldn't join us for this recording session, we've opted to ask him beforehand, while he was fighting said Cthulhu monsters, Lovecraftian entities from Beyond Our Nightmares, and he has elected that our next topic will be about the Dark Universe. If anyone remembers the failed MCU type thing that was going to happen for like the Universal Horror Monsters 5-ish years ago. And just everything about that, the missed potential, what went right, what went wrong, thoughts, ideas, could it come back, other things, yada yada yada, and just delve into that. So that should be fun, right, Matt? Right?
Oh shit! Does this mean I have to actually watch the Tom Cruise Mummy film?
I mean, I haven't even watched the Dracula Untold, so I'm probably just gonna do that one.
What all movies are in the? I guess I can look that. I guess I can. Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, because they ended it because that's why it's so funny, because it was like a cinematic universe. It's like if the MCU stopped after Incredible Hulk.
Okay, well that's good. I'll look into it. I'm sure I can find which ones are in it. But okay, interesting. Yeah, that sounds fun.
Okay.
I remember hearing about that, so that'll be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, this is the one thing that DC could point to. Like, see, we're fine, guys. Could have been a lot fucking worse.
That's true.
So yeah, catch us then. Until next time. What's a good? I have been a corpse for fun.
Yeah, I'm still the horror erotica lover.
You should have said the necrophiliac.
Well, that goes without saying. That's always true. That's not just an October thing.
Man of taste, I see. So, and we will be discussing things.
Boom, 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 boom.